Alright, so we got a lot to talk about when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, and some of it's kind of bad. In fact, honestly, I think most of it is bad. Yeah, there isn't really anything good coming out of the news cycle today, to be honest. So, the Vancouver Canucks yesterday played off against the Carolina Hurricanes in a game that I dubbed the most embarrassing loss of the season. It was unacceptable. They lost to 35-year-old Dustin Tokarski on a Carolina team that had played 5 games in 7 nights and was on the second half of a back-to-back. The Canucks didn't muster many scoring opportunities. They had very few shots in the contest, and they're back at it again today against the Toronto Maple Leafs. However, today's game already was under some disparity when you think about the circumstances between the two teams, because there was word from yesterday night that the Vancouver Canucks were having a little bit of difficulty leaving Raleigh, North Carolina, and heading over to Toronto. Here's Thomas Drance. I'm told the Vancouver Canucks did indeed stay overnight in Raleigh due to travel delays on Friday. The team was expecting to take off for Toronto shortly. This tweet was posted at 7 a.m. Pacific Vancouver time, so 10 a.m. in the East. Puck drop in Toronto at 7 p.m. tonight. It's a tough spot for the club to travel on the day of on the second leg of a back-to-back. It's very rare to see these kinds of outcomes for teams at the NHL level. Sure, you got a back-to-back, but normally the traveling would be done on the first night, but not this time. Who knows what the Canucks' sleep schedule is going to be looking like, what time they had to get up this morning in order to make the flight over to Toronto, and just the schematics of how everything is going to proceed with that. It is so not ideal, and especially when you consider how poorly the Canucks had played yesterday already, it doesn't bode well for a Vancouver Canucks viewing experience. Now, speaking about the upcoming game against Toronto, we had said yesterday that Vancouver played off against Carolina's backup and Dustin Tokarski. Heck, he's the backup because Freddie Anderson is out. Guess what? The Toronto Maple Leafs are also playing their backup because Anthony Stolarz is out. It's Dennis Hildeby who will be getting the start against the Vancouver Canucks today. That's Craig Berube going out there and giving Vancouver their backup again. So the Canucks, they couldn't do anything against 35-year-old Dustin Tokarski. Let's see what they'll be able to do against a much younger 23-year-old Dennis Hildeby, who has had such a limited amount of NHL experience over the past little while. Honestly, I respect it. Like, if the Maple Leafs were in a spot where they want to give their backup goaltender, or backup goaltender, I guess we could say instead, just some reps, see what he's about, see what it's like. It's not like they needed to start him. The Leafs last played on Thursday, January 9th, and then their next game is on Tuesday. There was enough time for Joseph Woll to get himself the start, the go-ahead here. But I get it. At the same time, it's like, do you really want to overload your goaltender when Anthony Stolarz is out, your secondary backup, or supposed to be backup, I guess? Joe Woll has played most of the games recently for Toronto. So hey, I respect it totally. Like, if there's a team to play off your backup against, it's Vancouver at this time, so good on Toronto. But I also wanted to get into some other notes about the Canucks and just some drama, not really drama, going on here. We had ourselves a recent episode of Agent Provocateur with Alan Walsh on the SDPN podcast network, and one of the interesting talking points that they had on this show was going over Alan Walsh's client in Vancouver. Of course, you can see from the title, it is Filip Hronek. Now, Hronek is in a pretty interesting spot because he is practicing with the Abbotsford Canucks. He was assigned there on a conditioning loan. There was initially some thought as to whether or not Hronek would be able to play any games for the Abbey Canucks or what have you, but things got really funny when you saw this Twitter transaction between Jeff Patterson and Alan Walsh. It's actually a bit of a long thread here because back on January 8th, Patterson posted that it's a promising development on the Hronek recovery file when Hronek ended up going to Abbotsford. Then these replies ensued. If EP40 or Hughes or Miller miss significant time, they wouldn't be sent to Abbey. Why Hronek? The Canucks' schedule doesn't really allow for much practice time. He has to agree to go down for conditioning, so probably he wanted to extra work to prepare himself. J-Pat then said this, "I think it's a good thing and something that should be utilized more. Dakota Joshua looks like he could have benefited from a few AHL games. The player has to agree to it, but it seems to make sense in a lot of levels. For Hronek, it's a good way to test himself and his progress in game action." Then, a few hours later, you had yourselves Alan Walsh replying this, "How can anyone think Filip Hronek is going to play games in Abbotsford? Would the club or player ever take that kind of risk? The Canucks are on the road, and Phil can practice with the AHL team as part of his rehab and recovery." So he calls out Jeff Patterson. J-Pat then has another thread. This came a little bit after the Alan Walsh tweet. "I'm willing to bet my entire life savings that Hronek doesn't play a second of AHL action. Sounds like that is indeed the plan. Practice but not play down there while the big league team is on the road. Still a positive step to get him back on the ice in a group setting." This J-Pat secondary tweet was tweeted just a little bit after Alan Walsh responded in a harsh way. And then on Agent Provocateur earlier this morning, you had Alan Walsh throwing shots at the Vancouver media when discussing the Hronek loan. Vancouver hockey media, as they tend to be the loudest media in the NHL and the most misinformed, never have seen so many people been so loud on so many issues they know absolutely nothing about. And I just gotta say, man, the Vancouver media strikes again. While it's not necessarily the most peaceful bunch that we have over here, at the end of the day, this is who we are. And I'll say that I am not really a part of the media. I'm just kind of a fan that has a YouTube channel and I talk about stuff here online. And I've made that very clear ever since this has been my full-time thing. I'm never wanting to pretend that I'm an analyst. So, or maybe not analyst. I think analyst is a broad term. Anybody can analyze anything. I don't want to pretend to be an insider. That's what it is. I'm not a part of the media. I'm just a part of the social media. Big difference there. But Alan Walsh and Jeff Patterson kind of going a little bit back and forth there. Kind of funny. Patterson didn't even say anything to Walsh. It's just Walsh that started it, to be honest. But anyways, ending things off on today's Canucks news and notes, I wanted to dive into something the NHL posted on their Twitter account. It is their current Norris Trophy tracker, based off of NHL.com's 16 writers casting their votes on a 5-4-3-2-1 points basis. Right now, based off of what NHL.com writers think, the number one Norris odds guy is Cale Makar with 76 points. Then you've got Quinn Hughes, Werenski, and Morrissey, all following with 58, 47, and 32 points. And then there's one other guy receiving 15 points, Victor Hedman. And you can totally understand why this has pissed off a lot of Canucks fans one more time. Yes, I get it, Quinn Hughes was injured. But when you take a look at this season, I think this tweet by Hughes is the GOAT, at Hughes for Norris, which is totally not biased, by the way, you could definitely see where they're coming from. Hughes leads defensemen in points per game by a significant margin. He has better defensive numbers than Makar. Makar's numbers are awful without McKinnon. It should be Quinn Hughes. And you have a whole bunch of other fans replying Quinn Hughes should be in the Hart Trophy. The fact that he's not number one on defense voting is insane. If you wanted to look at the NHL's point production stats for defensemen, Cale Makar has 49 points in 43 games. Quinn Hughes has 45 points in 37 games. So Quinn has a much higher point per game number. But Hughes did indeed miss some time recently, which I do think shouldn't affect his chances of winning the Norris or any sort of award, but it will play into it at some point, I think, because there also is the argument that it's like, hey, you look at what Vancouver did when Quinn Hughes was out of the lineup. They stunk. Heck, they still stink now when Quinn Hughes is in the lineup. He's still getting points sometimes, but this team can't do a thing without him on the ice. Cale Makar, it's the opposite. It's like, okay, Nathan MacKinnon is literally the top guy in points this year in the NHL, and it seems like, based off of this season alone, Cale Makar is having a pretty difficult time doing things without Nathan MacKinnon. Heck, if it were up to me, I'd rather have Zach Werenski on my ballot than Cale Makar. Werenski has been a force this season in a way that nobody expected. I guess you can say that Columbus has their own guys doing some really good work up front. Voronkov, Marchenko, Monahan, who has been injured for a while now. That team's been crazy, but Zach Werenski is one of the main play drivers on that squad. For Cale Makar, though, I get that he's first in points, but man, his defensive metrics, especially without MacKinnon on the ice, it definitely makes things very difficult to swallow for Canucks fans when they see that he's still, even after winning the Norris, being undervalued compared to Cale Makar. So I'll leave you all with that. The Canucks notes heading into today's game against Toronto. Alan Walsh and the Filip Hronek drama with the Vancouver media, as well as Quinn Hughes and his being undervalued once more by the NHL.com writers. Let me know in the comment section below what do you think about all this stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.